only at row 20. Then how would we do that? First of all, I need to create a breakpoint, and we see that it appears here. And then I need to add a conditional property. So by clicking right button, breakpoint properties, I can now click enable condition and then go myQuery dot current row equals 20. So standard CF code myQuery dot current row equals 20, and when that condition is true, it will break out. So if I click OK again and refresh this page, we'll see that it breaks out only when the current row is 20. So that can be very, very powerful when you're looping over large queries, or perhaps large structs, or lots of different types of information that you would not want to break on every repetition, but you would only want to break on when a certain condition is met. And that condition could be checking on one of the contents of the variable, so that could be checking the ID is 20, whether the current row is 20, or whether the label is the letter T. So that becomes very, very powerful. Now let's just go back and see what happens when I'm stepping over this code. So I will step through here, and you see on the left hand side, as I'm stepping through, you see that the letters of the alphabet are appearing on the left in the browser. So what happens when I come out of that loop? Remember, I have debugging switched on. So in Railo, debugging is dealt with using ColdFusion pages still. So we can even still see what's happening on the debugging pages here inside my development environment. So I'm still in FusionDebug and I'm still debugging code, but it's actually part of the internal workings of Railo, and it's my debugging CFM. So you can debug any type of ColdFusion code. So let's just resume the execution of that page. And we'll see there that the page is now completed, and I've got the debugging information at the bottom. So that can be very, very powerful, the conditional breakpoints. Let's have a look at some of the other features. So break on runtime exception. Let's have a look at the code. This was actually quite interesting for me. So the first time I wrote an example, and I thought, oh, how can I get a runtime exception to occur? And I thought, oh, divide by 0 would be a typical problem. So I just simply loop from 5 to -5, stepping down by -1 each time. And I was expecting that when I come to do the divide by 0, that it would throw an error. But let's have a look and see what actually happens. So if I click on this first example, you see that Railo actually uses a different method than throwing an error. It will actually say that 100 divided by 0 is actually infinity. So that's quite an interesting thing that I didn't know about Railo's, coming across that. And let's see what actually happens in FusionDebug though, when we do get a runtime error. So let's open up this second example. And again, you can see that I tried to run through dividing by 0, and then on line 8, I've tried to make a call to a function, but that function is not defined. So this will only become apparent when I actually run the code. So let's click the second example, and we'll see that it throws an error. And the way that we get it to pick up on these problems is that we make a configuration change in here. So here under exception breakpoints, we need to set all, and what that means is that on all errors that FusionDebug should intercept the error, and we should be able to see the stack inside FusionDebug. So I'll click set all, apply, and continue. I then need to reconnect to the server, so I'm going to click disconnect, and then I'm going to click relaunch, and I'm now reconnected to the server. So this time when I refresh, we'll see that it has thrown out the page into FusionDebug, and I can see the error here, I'm just going to maximize this window, and we see that it says no matching method or function, undefined function name, and it highlights the line of the code for me. And this would happen even if I didn't have the code open. So let's resume the page, which again throws the same output. So let's close that and refresh, and you'll see that it opens up the file for me, selects the line, and tells me everything that I need to know about this application. I can go into variables again, standard views. I can see what the variables are. I can see that the variable A is 100 and that I has got to -6 because it has stepped out of here, so I would have reached -6. And I can see absolutely everything that is happening in the execution flow of my application. So these are very simple examples, but you can see the power where you can build up big applications, and with Flex and asynchronous JavaScript, you can see that you get into a lot of situations where typical debugging like CFDump and CFOutput or CFlog and writing to files and so on is not necessarily the best way to be debugging applications. Now that we have these new technologies and new ways of developing, it's not always as simple to edit code, or sometimes there's lots of code to edit. And this is a very useful, very fast way of being able to avoid those problems. So let's just resume that page and let's have a look at some more examples. So run to line, what's that all about? Let's have a look. So example 3, let's have a look at the code, and you can see that I've just printed out the 5 times table here. It's a very simple page, and what happens if I toggle a breakpoint on this line here, then refresh the page. As expected, we'll see that it gets to that line, and before that line gets executed, it's actually broken out. Now, in a large application, you might not want to step through every line of the code. That might take you a long time to get to where you're looking to be. So let's say I've identified what the variable that I'm interested in up at this location is. I've stepped through a little bit and I've followed the flow of the execution of the program. But now I want to actually skip right down to almost at the end, and I want to get down to this point in the file. Then rather than having to step through every line, which could take a long time, without setting a new breakpoint, without doing anything extra, I can just right click and say run to line, and that will cause the application to run until it hits that line. So let's click that, and as you can see, it's now broken out at this point in the execution of the program. And that doesn't create a new breakpoint, so it won't fire next time I run. It literally, just for this debugging session, it allows me to skip all the execution that I'm not interested in and get to this point. So that can be very powerful for if you have large applications with large chunks of decision code that you don't want to step through line by line. You can just skip the problems or skip the piece of code that you know how that's going to execute and go straight to the problem. So let's resume that page and have a look at some of the other features. So I mentioned at the beginning that FusionDebug has an advanced stepping technology which makes it the fastest CFML step debugger. So let's have a look at some code that's an example of that. So here I've created an example that just loops over 100 times, and it includes a custom tag and also output something to the screen. So FusionDebug, if I add a breakpoint here and then refresh this page, we'll see that it toggles out at this point. Now this is where the step into function comes in. So here up in the execution window I have this button which is called step into, and what that does is it will actually drill into this custom tag. So let's press that and see what happens. In this case it's actually stepped over, and the reason for that is if we look inside the custom tag is that there's no ColdFusion code inside it. So if there's no ColdFusion code to execute, then there's no place that FusionDebug can stop execution. So let's close that file and have a look at this. So again, I could use step into, and step into that